Okay, greetings everyone. This is chapter 3 of the book by Senso and D'Angelo called Is Everyone Really Equal? And that's the text I use for many of my Northern Kentucky University courses as it relates to diversity. And so let us jump right in to chapter 3. I'm going to share my screen. You can be right up to speed to see where I am. Chapter 3 deals with culture and socialization. Culture and socialization. It seems like I lost my screen there. And let's try this again. Okay. Culture and socialization. When you think about culture, what do you think about? Well, culture is more fluid. A lot of times we look at culture as being an inherent characteristic, but culture has to do with language or a way of life that could change if one moves to, for example, a different geographical location. Or you can adopt, for example, college culture. You might live in a rural setting and out in the country, and when you go to college to a larger city, you adopt the culture that's associated with the campus or the city. So culture is more fluid. Socialization is the process of learning from various institutions, whether it is a religious institution or an educational institution or a family institution. Whatever has socialized us to shape us into being who we are today as a social being. That can change too, but social aspects seem to be harder to change than culture. Culture is often, it could be as simple as clothing, like hip hop culture or skateboard culture, the way individuals dress, or a sports culture, soccer culture. That could be taken off. A lot of times when taken off not in the physical sense, but absconded and going into a different kind of way of life, you can change. So when one grows up, maybe you play soccer your whole life and you dressed a certain way. You wore the soccer clothes, the slides, and you always had on shorts. But when you graduated from high school and you went off to college, maybe you didn't play soccer anymore. So your whole culture changed, okay, the aspect of you. But socialization is a little bit more difficult to identify. So let's jump right in thinking about race, class, and gender. The book really focuses on primarily those three in a broader sense. It also gets into other isms, ableism, discrimination against senior citizens, so ageism. But the quote says, "I don't think people's race, class, or gender. I don't think about people's race, class, or gender. I just see people." How many of us have thought about this? Now, this is a very noble notion. Often people will say this with well-meaning intentions, but it's not realistic. When you look at a person, you can tell, especially race, and when you can tell what race they belong to or subscribe to. For example, when you all met me, even if it was virtually, you knew I was an African American. And so when we say I don't see color, often we are dismissing the person's identity. So what are your thoughts on this? You can even leave it in the comment. Okay. The chapter explains the process of socialization, and I talked a little bit about socialization in my opening remarks. This interplay between our individuality versus our membership in a social group, such as race, gender, and social class. So this interplay between who you are as an individual your membership as a Muslim, as a Christian, for example, religious group, as a part of an Appalachian family, or maybe your Irishness is a huge part of your identity. So this interplay. Our views, ideas, and opinions are not simply individual. Sometimes we go through life thinking I'm an individual, nobody influenced me, but you are being influenced, for example, by Disney. You Disney fans out there, you grew up from the time you remember opening your eyes, you were watching Disney. You were watching Ariel, the Little Mermaid. And me too. The songs are embedded in my head. I want to go where the people go, up on where they walk on those streets. I'm skipping something. Up where they laugh, up where they roam, up where they play all day in the sun, wandering free. Wish I could be part of your world. And I really don't know when I don't remember when I learned that. But it's deeply ingrained in me. We must have watched it a lot. So I was using the Disney example of showing how, even though I feel like, or we feel like we're individuals, we've been shaped by something. From the time we open our eyes, they were playing Little Mermaid and Cinderella, some of the old classics, or some of the newer ones out there, The Princess and the Frog, and all of the things that we were indoctrinated. It shaped our views. That's just one example. And I use the religious example too. It shapes how we see the world. Our ideas, views, and opinions are not simply individual, objective, independent, but rather the result of social messages and conditioning forces. Some scholars call it a hidden curriculum. What is culture? And I jumped the gun earlier. I began to talk about what this is. The norms, values, practices, patterns of communication, language, laws, customs, meaning shared, just shared meaning, a collective meaning by a group of people, located in a given time and place. It could be the culture of the high school you went to. Many of you probably went to like a rural high school out in the country, and there was a particular mindset and culture that mostly everybody had, that when you left that context, it changes, it shifts. There are many examples of culture in our society, and the notion of culture takes on different forms and understanding. Culture versus socialization. This refers to our systematic training. So socialization is a little bit more deeply embedded, a training into norms of our culture. So what were the things that, if you live in a farming society, what was that part of that socialization process that taught you how that way of life? Until you seem, it's the center of the universe for you. It's the center of the world. It seems like, oh, everybody's doing this. But if you got out of that farming community, people are going to think, that's interesting. Why did you all do it like that? Well, where at the same time, you feel like this was the only way to do it. It is a process of learning the meanings and practices that enable us to make sense of and behave appropriately in that culture, whatever that definition of appropriate is. And I like to use the religious example again. In some churches, you don't talk at all. The norm is you are silent, like a holy silentness. Is that a word? Versus other churches, like a lot of African American churches, they are expected to comment when the preacher is going forth. The preacher will be giving a sermon. Someone will say, "Amen," tell it like it is. That's part of their norm. Whereas if that person went to a quiet church, a church that was maybe a predominantly white church, people would think that was strange to comment while the minister is speaking. It might be considered rude. So cultural norms. This is one of my favorite illustration graphics. I think it really helps us understand culture. The iceberg, it's called the iceberg concept of culture. Now, if you look above the iceberg, there is surface level culture. The way someone dresses, like Native American dress, music, visual arts. For example, let's say the Navajo Indians, because there's different Native Americans, hundreds of different tribes, and different dozens and dozens of languages. But anyway, think about like a Navajo tradition, the way they eat, drama, crafts, dance, literature. That's surface level, and often that's how we deal with people. But we don't often get lower and look at deep culture, courteous, like rules around being courteous, contextual conversational patterns, a concept of time. I like to use this example. I was in Africa a couple years ago doing some research, and I noticed that their concept of time is different from Western concept of time. When they have something to do, they do it all day. And I went to using the religious example again. I went to a religious service, and they didn't have 5 other things to do in that day. If you have that going on, that's what you have going on. It's such a different concept for us because we try to see how much we can squeeze in into one day. A very Afrocentric way of looking at life is if we're doing this one thing, if we're going to a wedding, we do a wedding all day. So personal space. I noticed when I went to Mexico, people are a lot closer when they talk to you versus in the United States, we like to keep our distance. I guess it depends on what city you're into. And so when we get into deep culture, there's all of these rules and regulations, relationship to animals, notions of leadership, who can lead. Maybe it's a patriarchal society where a lot of women are in leadership. Like in Black culture, it tends to be a patriarchal society in many ways. And then there's the unconscious rules that are completely below the surface. Concept, tolerance of physical pain. You're expected to endure pain and not show it. Attitudes toward dependence. Do children have a lot of autonomy, or are children taught to be seen and not heard, or vice versa? Or have that old adage. In other words, children are taught to not interact. They're not on the same level as adults. Problem solving roles in a relationship to age, sex, class, occupation, kinship, and so forth. Okay. Perspective check. What's below the surface is often easier to see when the deep culture you have been socialized into does not match the deep culture you are currently navigating. And so you might have grown up in rural Kentucky. You speak a certain way, and you have a certain way of looking at life. You don't dress in fancy clothes, new clothes. You have maybe perhaps a very relaxed way of life, and then you go to another culture, and they're putting on airs, as we say, and it's like, this is ridiculous. And so your culture, deep culture, comes to the surface. For example, is there a difference between your culture at home and the culture at your university? I talked about this. Or the job or school that you teach in, that we have to make adjustments. What might be considered abnormal may be normal to somebody else. Example, personal space. So let's not be ethnocentric where we feel that our culture is the best and everybody should do it like us. You might have a preference, but I want to push you a little bit and say, well, maybe my way of doing it is not always the best way. It's just my way of looking at it. Like going to college, style of dress. When you go to certain parts of the country, out west, they wear cowboy hats. When I first saw that, I thought, I just wasn't used to it. I wasn't used to it, and I thought it was a little strange. But of course, I was wrong because there's a whole culture around cowboy hats. But I hadn't seen that. I'm not from those type of areas. Handshakes and hugs. Some cultures kiss on the cheek, and every time, and I've been in those cultures, and that makes me uncomfortable because I don't really necessarily like to be touched all the time. But I know in my community we had these elaborate handshakes, and all kinds of, we had, my friends and I had these long handshakes. It was like a game, a ritual. That's culture. But culture is different from socialization. Remember, culture can be gotten rid of a lot easier than social, because socialization is so deeply ingrained. You often don't even know it. It just seems like the air that we breathe. What is our role in relationship to groups in which we belong? How do we fit in? and or relate to these groups. The groups may include family unit, high school basketball team. That's a good example. Like soccer team, volleyball team. You become really close. And you even have sayings or even handshakes that you do, especially if you were on one of those winning teams where you won regionals or you almost won state or you won state. You become really close to those individuals. And even the coach knows the handshakes and the sayings, whatever slang is important at that particular time. Let's get it, those kinds of things. Church family, I talk about religious examples, middle class neighborhood, racial, different groups that we belong to. What's your role? Do you play a leadership role there? College student, fraternity or sorority, social class. Think about leadership in that context, in a diverse society. And look at diversity here. This gives us a really good picture of diversity because often, because we struggle so much with race and ethnicity in this country, even right now, most of the people that are being arrested, whether they are legal or illegal by the ICE agency, are folks from are brown folks from South America. And so race and ethnicity is still a huge sticking point here in our nation, even nationality. But diversity, of course, is broader than that. You got social class, you got gender, sexuality, religion, ability, nationality. And so think about those groups. And on page 45, you see that chart. So I'll skip that there. So in closing of this chapter, let's think about ourselves as leaders, educational leaders. Think about that slide I put up as it relates to different kinds of diversity. In what ways, so why are we talking about socialization? In what ways can we examine ourselves as teachers, as leaders, as business owners, as nurses, wherever you find yourself, medical profession, educational world? How can we examine ourselves the way we were socialized and think about how that might influence the way we lead? It's not about critiquing yourself and being overly critical, but just being aware of our upbringing, what influenced our worldview, and how that affects the way I do things. Thank you so much. We will talk to you next time.